Hello, everyone. Dr. Eames here. This time I'd like to talk to you about process theories of motivation. Now, process theories, like I've discussed with you with content theories, deal with internal factors, but in a slightly different way. It's much more dynamic than the content theories, and it focuses on the constant cognitive processes that we've got going on that are evaluating whether or not we're happy or we enjoy our job and what are all the little things along the way that are making us unhappy about it. Um, and so the first process theory I'd like to talk about of the two that I'm going to cover this time is Adams' equity theory of motivation. Now, Adams is really just focused on fairness in the workplace and justice in the organization when it came to relations between the organization and the employee. He also felt that there ought to be a measure of compromise there between the organization and what they wanted from the employee. And if you could reach that mutually agreed upon accommodation, that you would get the best of both worlds. So, from Adams' point of view, his equity theory was really about the relationship between the employee and the employer. In fact, he considered that relationship an exchange. And in that exchange, that there should be some equity. That equity could be measured by the employee as either negative or positive, maybe occasionally neutral, but certainly when it's in the negative sphere, then employees tend to not be at their most motivated or the most productive and so forth. And so in that sense, when we look at equity theory, we look at the inputs that a person puts into their work and what they're really getting out of it. So here's a little more detail on that. Adams is thinking that the concept of equity means we have a balance. And so the balance is between what we put into things and what we get out of it. And as you can see here, we've got some details on what those things might be. So the things we put into our job are certainly our time and effort. And as it says here, things that go beyond that too, your personal sacrifice occasionally, maybe your heart and soul, but your tolerance, your loyalty, flexibility, and so forth. All of those are important factors. And when you are making that evaluation on whether or not you're happy in your job, those are the things that you're really studying and you're giving some value to. And you're looking at the things you're getting back in return for all of that other stuff. So, are you getting paid enough? Do you get an occasional bonus or do you get anything like that? Are there any perks, any particular benefits? Do you have a sense of security in your job and in the longevity of your job? Do you get recognition? Um, are you getting career development as a professional and as an individual? Uh, do you feel like you've got a great reputation by working in the department you're in and for the company that you work for? Do you get enough responsibility and praise? And at the end of the day, are you satisfied in your job? And so the idea is it is very much a balancing act between these two things, the inputs and the outputs. If you feel like you're not getting enough, then you respond accordingly. So here's another way to look at it, a graphic that really tells us some of the ways it could go. We're really looking for equity. When our outcomes are divided by the inputs, we get a certain result, and we're always sort of comparing ourselves to someone else, a reference, so another employee, and we're looking at that employee and saying, are they working just as hard as myself, and are they getting the same thing out of it? If we see that as happening, that you're working just as hard as they are, and you're getting the same pay or the same equity, then you do feel like this is fair. Here, the authors have put this graphic have put the worker contributes more inputs, but also gets more outputs than the referent. That could also be the case where you feel like although you are getting more, it's it's not unfair because you are putting more into it. And so in that sense, it's one way to look at it. And of course, this is perspective, selective perspective, and it's from the perspective of the individual worker. So say that you feel that there's a lack of equity, underpayment of it. The outcomes divided by your inputs are less than the outcomes divided by the inputs of someone else you're looking at, another referent. And so you're contributing more inputs, but gets the same as someone else. It might be the way you're looking at it. You're working just as hard. Um, or you're working harder, but you're getting the same amount as the other person. And so the question you ask yourself is, why am I working harder than they are to get the same thing? Overpayment comes when you are contributing the same input, but you're getting more than the other person, so that position is reversed. And certainly you can see from the way these are worded that there are different variations of the theme here that we could look at. But the notion is that we're really talking about equity. And with this equity is a notion of fairness, and that as people, we're just making that human comparison to those around us. Here's the second theory of process of motivation I'd like to talk about is VROOM'S expectancy theory. Vroom gives us some new terms and so forth to look at motivational theory, but really it's much about the same sorts of things I've been talking about. Adams was talking about we have inputs, and he lays out a lot of detailed types of inputs, and we get certain outputs that we expect. Well, Vroom just puts it in some different terms. We have expectancy, and then he lays out the way we look at expectancy with how much effort are we putting out. And he looks at, okay, how hard are we performing? Well, he looks at that as that's the instrumentality and so forth. And then finally he comes up with, well, or what is our final verdict? And he calls that the valence, where most of the time we would look at that in terms of our effort leads to some sort of performance, leads to rewards. So he just uses the terms expectancy, instrumentality, and valence. And so let's just look at the way it's written here, because it is helpful to trying to understand this perspective. Will my effort lead to high performance or not? If you think it will your performance lead to the outcome that you are expecting? So you have expectations. You expect that a certain amount of effort will result in a certain reward. And then you have to look at the final verdict. Do you think it was positive or negative or neutral? And that's your valence. Do I find the outcome desirable? So let's look at it again in another format here. Expectancy is the belief that your performance follows some degree of effort. That makes sense if you think effort's warranted and that there's some equity in it, because we're still thinking in terms of what is fair and how much should you put out, then your performance is going to follow what you think is the right amount of effort. So an example here is those who put out more effort get more back. And so what would lead you to expect that sort of thing? And that's what expectancy theory is based on. Well, the things that create your expectancy are any previous experience you've had in that area. So previous success or failure certainly influences your expectancy. Your self-esteem as a person, that affects your expectancy and what you expect to get for a certain amount of effort. Are you given all the materials you need and provided with all the resources it takes to get that job done in terms of resources, equipment, everything you need? And if you think it meets the expectations, then again, you may put out a certain degree of effort based on that level. So your effort really is, according to Vroom, your instrumentality, the belief that your outcomes are going to flow as a result of how much effort you put out. And so the example is the company gives you a profit sharing or commission-based bonus as some form of compensation. So what do? That basically is a model that says the harder you work, the more you can earn. So that would be the instrumentality you base your judgment on in the final look. And so what do you base that effort, that instrumentality on? Well, the potential reward. If you think the reward is commensurate with how much effort it's going to take to get that reward. And you could be influenced by previous success stories and historical data and so forth, things like that, that says, yes, a certain amount of effort is going to result in this happening. And then so we get to the reward stage where we really evaluate how did it go? And that's valence, according to Vroom. And so the belief that the outcomes follow these expectancies we have and the effort that we put out, the performance, that we get a certain reward. That's the valence. And again, it could be positive, negative, it could be neutral, but generally we more or less make up our mind one way or the other. The example here, a positive valence will result in a more favorable success, where a negative valence is contrary. So certainly, if you're satisfied with the result and it's what you expected, remember we're dealing with expectancy, then you're probably going to have a positive valence. And so that could be a variety of things that are influencing you to think that. It could be recognition, that's a positive result. It could be money, a bonus of some type. It could be many different things. On the negative side, the valence might be additional stress in your job, uh, cognitive dissonance, that static we experience when things aren't going our way and our values aren't in alignment with the organization's, getting laid off or finding out the news that that's really what's at the end of all this process. So Vroom's expectancy theory is really about so many things. All right, folks, that's what I wanted to talk about this time. I'll talk to you again soon.